And welcome to SLAC's panel discussion, Putting Sex and Power on the Line. I'd like to introduce to you our moderator. He's only been to Utah for 2 years. He comes from San Antonio, Texas. He's the news director for KUER. I'd like to introduce to you Terry Gilday.
Thanks, everybody. I saw this play a couple weeks ago, and I'm so excited to talk about it. And I just want to give a nod to Tracy Callahan and Patrick and Mars there for an amazing production. To my immediate left is Jake Van Epps. He's a couples therapist at the Center for Mind-Body Health. Jake, welcome. Julie Taylor is an instructor in gender and organized communication at the University of Utah. Julie, thanks for being here. And Beth Clement is an associate professor of history, and she's also involved in gender studies at the University of Utah. Beth, thanks for being here. What were some of the gender dynamics that you saw right off there? Beth, why don't we start with you? What when you look at sort of where Vonda and Thomas start with the play, what's going on in the dynamics there?
Well, what I thought was interesting about that was the way that he starts with, he's having this conversation with his partner, Stacy, as we later find out, Stacy. And he's complaining about the quality, basically, of modern womanhood, but as seen through acting. So actresses, and they all are terrible, and they're all shallow, and they don't know anything. And then what's fun is that she comes in and fulfills those stereotypes to a certain extent, right? She's kind of crass, she just keeps dropping the F-bomb all the time. At the same time that she's obviously, and increasingly as the play progresses, incredibly interesting, far more interesting than he is, actually. And she starts to draw him in, and so that seduction, and I don't do theater, faculty really, we're hams, we're not actors. But she's trying to seduce him into allowing her first to have this audition and then to take the part, and then as the play progresses, it gets more complicated. But she's a much more interesting character than he is, and I found the play kind of surprising that way, that he doesn't really achieve any growth or change in any way, and that there's a way in which he's stuck in the 19th century, right? That the play to me seemed to be about him not really thinking of women as people, right, who, had changes and had ideas and, thought about things. He thought more about what women could do for him. Not necessarily in a mean or yucky way, but he seemed kind of immature. And so that was sort of striking to me, too, that she sort of starts to work him through some of his issues as a way of trying to get a part in a play.
What I want to add to that is this idea of the third wave feminist is kind of what I saw coming out when she first walked in, because it's this idea of independence and being able to choose who you want as a woman and having power. And she's, everything that she wants to be. I can be really, really eloquent and very intelligent, but I can also come down and do the like and the F-bombs and really just kind of being her own person. So I thought that the play with third wave feminism was actually pretty beautiful.
I saw kind of a real dichotomy. She came in and she was almost a damsel in distress, right? I'm late, can you help me? I'm late, can you help me? Can I get this audition? And at the same time, she was a very strong personality. She also got increasingly undressed until he agreed to kind of interact with her and a little bit more. So it was just kind of a dichotomy at the beginning, and I think that strong personality came more and more out as the play went on.
And I think the moment that Thomas realizes that a different person has walked into the room, or these stereotypes are shattered, is the moment that Vonda takes on the persona of the woman in the play. And I just want to read a couple of lines from the script, because I just couldn't stop reading the script. And she becomes herself, an individual. And then Vonda comes back into her own self, and she says, God, old Vonda's seriously ahead of her time, isn't she? And Thomas says, no, Leopold von Sacher-Masoch was. So he even takes that away from her. See, Danaev is coming alive, and we're seeing what she is, but Thomas can't even see that it's the character that's rising, that the woman is rising there. He actually thinks that it's the man's idea in this novel that brings this woman alive. He even takes that away from her. Beth, this moment, I think these, when we talk about nothing crueler than women's infidelity, but there is to a woman the enforced fidelity of men, I think that's kind of what we call in journalism the nut graph of the play, right? That's right there. That's the struggle. And what's coming out in that scene, do you think, that defines both of the characters, not only in the audition world, but in the play world as well?
Well, historically, I mean, Vonda's right, whichever Vonda we're talking about here, in that, women are held to a different standard, particularly in the 19th century. And I mean, I'm an American historian, so I can't speak entirely to European history, but I mean, marriage contracts are basically a form of ownership of women. Women's sexuality does not belong to them. It's not until the 1970s that husbands can actually rape their wives, because rape is a crime of property until the 1970s, and you can't trespass on your own property. And so there's a lot that she's saying, and Vonda the actress is absolutely right. Like, I'm not sure I would say she's ahead of her time. I think a lot of women in the end of the 19th century had these thoughts. I mean, one of the things I loved about the play, and I very much enjoyed it, was the way in which he both preserves and changes the original play. The original sort of Venus in Furs, which is entirely part of a man's imagination. And what Ives has done is he's added a feminist into this. And so the little feminist voice that might be in your head when you're in college reading it yourself, and you're like, really? Really? This is literature? As opposed to Vonda, it was like, it's porn, right? And very male-oriented porn. Like, this is a man's imagination of what a woman can do for him. It's interesting. It's not even a man's imagination of what a woman is. It's what a woman can do for him, first to dominate him because he thinks that that's what he wants, and then to become submissive because that's what he wants, but it's also what she's supposed to do. I mean, that's the move. That's the normal move. In the late 19th century. And so what's fun is Vonda's sort of constant dialogue and breaking of the text, right? And they'll be in the play, and then all of a sudden she'll be like, that is so sexist, right? And Thomas is so deeply invested in the play, it's like he can't really actually have a relationship with anything but the play. And then he, and she keeps jacking that up for him in really interesting ways. And so I like that, right? Because it is this classic text, and it's this classic sexualized text about power and allegedly about gender, although not really. And then there's this feminist, third-wave feminist, or somebody, some feminist in there saying, well, this is just a crock of shit. And I really enjoyed that as well.
Well, what I thought of was this idea, kind of going back again in history to like where this idea comes from. And Betty Friedan in the 1960s wrote a book called The Feminine Mystique, and she talked about this idea of the problem that has no name. And really it was this idea that women just felt like every day is kind of the same. We're not really... Sexuality doesn't really become part of that. And so as the book goes on, she starts talking about how sexuality really becomes a way for women to start expressing themselves. And for me, like, that was kind of the mirror image, was this book and like that line, and this idea of the moment of sexuality and the moment of her power and her expressing herself was really through sex and through kind of, that was her way of becoming herself, I guess, is kind of the mirroring that I saw in that.
Take us through how you deal with that on a therapy level. What kind of suggestions do you give to couples who are having some of the struggles that we see Kashemsky and Vonda having?
Well, that's a big question. I think in therapy, one of the things that I really encourage my clients to do is figure out who they are as an individual and really seek that out and try hard in life to live that, because a lot of times in relationships we give up our sense of self and we give everything to the other, or we take everything from the other. And that's the quickest way to kind of just break down the passion in a relationship. So, discovering who you are and expressing that, communicating that to your partner, even if it's hard or difficult or uncomfortable, that's kind of the path I would take. So.
This concept of the stereotypical woman as she came into the story, and join that with how we expect women to come up to the level of men and come to the table. I think Vonda was way ahead of him from the get-go. And I think as a society, we've got it kind of backwards, is that the men really have to catch up with Vonda. So, if you could comment on that, please.
Like Thomas as a character feels like, first of all, he's stuck in the 19th century of all places.
For sure.
Which, to be fair to Thomas, I mean, only white guys are really comfortable there. And hopefully they've moved beyond it, right? And said, you know what, there's a lot of other people that really weren't enjoying that whole model. But I mean, does he seem delayed to you? I mean, he seems sort of stuck in this weird place where he feels both inferior and superior at the same time.
Yeah, but I tend to see most white straight men still stuck there. I mean, not to stereotype people, but you know, when I think about growth of masculinity, I feel like it's really hard for men to do that. It's hard to get past, you know, the only acceptable emotion being anger to express, or you know, to show sensitivity and caring and respect for your partner and what your partner's, you know, desire to be when they fulfill their lives. It's just, you know, this is my career, you got to support me in doing this, or, you know, what I want is important is something that I feel like I see a lot in relationships. And so he did feel delayed, but he also felt pretty representative. Yeah.
Let's explore fidelity versus infidelity. I mean, is fidelity something that's completely achievable? Is infidelity inevitable?
I think it's interesting looking at Vonda's character. I think it almost, Thomas becomes kind of her toy in a way. And so it's not necessarily that she is encouraging him to cheat on Stacy, but really this moment of realizing her position. Right, my position in intellect, my position in sexual power, and everything over him. And so I really saw that moment as like playing with him as a toy, which I think then kind of comes back to this, like, what kind of power do we perceive women, or do women think that they have because of sexuality?
From a couples therapy standpoint, I maybe think to myself, you know, there are a lot of things that Thomas does in the play that aren't very responsible, but there's a lot of things that Vonda does in the play that are not only irresponsible, but in a sense destructive, right? With that situation, what role does that manipulation play in the dynamics of that kind of relationship?
Well, there's definitely things happening that weren't clearly articulated or communicated or negotiated between Vonda and Thomas. So, you know, that's for me the big underlying dynamic that evokes a kind of idea of manipulation, right? That things aren't transparent and out there. But, you know, what responsibility does she have for Thomas to be faithful to his partner? But he does have a responsibility, at least I assume so, or I'm assuming so now in this conversation. But, you know, for me, the fidelity is a tricky question that, you know, for some people, it's having a physical connection with people outside of a relationship. For other people, it's not that. For some people, it's maybe looking in the direction of somebody else while you're in the relationship. So it's something that's communicated, hopefully, and not just reacted to. And there wasn't a whole bunch of communication.
I mean, couldn't you make the argument that he's cheating on Stacy with Vonda the play? Right, with the character.
Sure.
I mean, because he's not. I mean, he's kind of in a place where he's bored, right, with his relationship, and he wants to do it because it's allegedly what he wants, and and she's a good person, right, and she's good for him. And oh, by the way, she seems to be supporting him. And so yeah, so there's all this. Yeah, but I mean, even if you want to be positive about Thomas, which I'm happy to do, right? I'm happy to try to put myself in that place. You know, he has this life and he wants this thing, and what he wants is to be a successful playwright, and also maybe to work through whatever this play means to him, because he's got sort of two joint goals there, right? He wants to be successful in his job, he wants to be good at what he does. This is his first opportunity to direct, right? And so he's, you know, sort of embarking on a new part of his career. And I mean, I guess in terms of fidelity, what's interesting to me is what are people's goals coming into this room? Right, and his goal is to find an actress to fit this part, but because he's so involved in the play, he actually has a lot of goals. And her goal is to get the part. And so I don't see, again, I agree with you about the responsibility. She has no responsibility to him, right? She has a responsibility to herself to do what she needs to get, you know, to get out of this what she needs to get out of it. And if that ends up meaning manipulating him, although it feels to me like she just helps him manipulate himself. Right? I mean, I don't feel, I mean, she's like, oh, look at this little drama we have going on in your head. Let's see how I can get this to work. So it seems like, I guess I didn't understand the fidelity aspect of it. It didn't feel like that was the main conversation, unless you think about it in terms of goals, right? Can you be loyal to your goals? What are your goals and how do you pursue them? And at what point do you need to stop because you're actually going to hurt someone else versus everybody's an individual and we all have the right to do whatever we want.
Don't we think that she was teaching him? Like,
well, someone should. So.
no, no, exactly. I guess that's what my point. That's what I took away from it, was that she was like putting him in his place. That he has this fantasy of the way that this is supposed to be, and she's telling him you're wrong. And that's basically at the end. And I don't know how the actor and actresses feel, but that's my sense. The whole play was geared towards, here's this man who's got it all in his head of how it's supposed to be perfect, and this is how it's going to be, and I wrote it, and it's right because I wrote it. And she's like, you're wrong, dude.
David Ives doesn't really tell us in the script whether Vonda is looking for the pleasure that comes with the sexual conquest over Thomas, or whether she is interested in hurting Thomas in any way, shape, or form. We don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know from seeing it. I don't know from reading it. But let's talk about that for a second. Any thoughts on what Vonda's objective really is by the end of the play? Yeah.
Well, I would say that she was in charge from the moment she walked in the door. And she didn't appear to me the sort of woman who wanted to be dominating over a man. So I don't believe she ever had really any sexual interest in him at all. And any sexual power that she had over him that she could use, as you said, to get the role, to be able to continue with the interview, she was willing to exploit that if she could. But other than that, she was basically in control. And she also was so much more insightful, analytical, and intellectual about what was going on in the play than he was. And he was sort of like a flat earth guy. And you would want her to be the sort of person you discuss something with. Him not so much, because his would be, well, because that's the way I wrote it. And he wouldn't really want to think about it. So he was not, in my estimation, he was not at all interesting to her in a personal sexual way. She saw him for what he was from the outset, and I don't think her feelings about him ever changed. His were all over the board. He was like a ping pong ball in this thing. He didn't know whether to throw her out or not. And when he erupted, it was basically because she just kept calling his bluff so many times that he realized how little he understood the play himself, that he just exploded.
Well, I disagree completely, because I think it was probably just as big a turn on for her as it was for him when she got him going and got him into a new place for him. So,
my question is, who was she? She didn't even have an appointment.
was she after?
She was. Right. She did not have.
Goddesses don't need appointments.
And the same name as the character, right? So.
Well, she came in late, looking unprepared, and she not only knew the play, she knew all these details about Thomas's life. So yeah, she was prepared. I'll go to this gentleman up here. Sorry.
Was she set up by Stacy or not? That's only.
So I just want to say that's how the Greek goddess did it. And in any Greek play, they would magically appear, and you would be the puppets in the play. So if you know anything about Greek mythology, that's who Aphrodite was. So she really was Aphrodite.
What happens to Thomas after this play is over?
He's in a better place, right? Because he's aware that he's in a mess. And that's always helpful, right? It's useful to know, wow, it's some stuff to work on. And so I think that's interesting. And again, I agree that she is Aphrodite the goddess, although to me that's a little bit of a cop-out on Ives' part because it means that Thomas never meets an actual woman in the play, which would be frustrating to me, right? Like if the point is you need to come to terms in your relationship with the fact that your partner is a person and that person will change and that person has desires and interests that, you know, are yours but are the overlap with yours and are different than yours, and that's what makes a good relationship. If she's Aphrodite, there's no woman in the play.
The goddesses take on a human role to teach humans to be more human.
Right.
So she actually does embody a human spirit. In many of the Greek mythology, that's what all the gods do. And it's so that they can become more human, that they have that experience too, but it's also to teach the humans. So I see her as human in the play.
So do you think Thomas is going to learn something from her?
Oh, absolutely, and he did. I think he did. I think he did wake up by the end of the play.
Wake up to what, though?
I know, really.
Yeah.
That's what I was talking.
Well, I think he heard what Vana had to say, and over the course of it, he may have been kicking and screaming, but I do believe he internalized what. And in my
evidence that is.
Well, but I just feel like he was involved enough and wanted it to continue and wanted to hear her opinions. I mean, didn't shut her off and throw her out. To me, he did internalize. That's my opinion.
Well, I think more than anything, it wasn't so much that he was dominated by Vonda, he was dominated by his own passion, which is something I don't think he was aware of and expressed prior to this. And I think what he really became present to is that passion that he wrote about, but now he had actually experienced. And I think his relationship, if he goes back to, Tracy or whatever, would never be the same as a result. So that's what makes the play, to me, very exciting.
Someone who, in the end, he actually all throughout the play, his character took the submissive role, except for in the very beginning as the director, right? Even when they switched characters in the end, he still transitioned very quickly back to the submissive role. And in the end, it was, kind of the ultimate submissive role. And just going into what we know about him, right? He has this very successful wife who kind of has everything together, and is this struggling playwright, probably has a lot of pressures and trying to get everything right. You heard those frustrations in the very beginning of the play. Perhaps for him, having somebody else take complete control over him so that he didn't have to worry about getting all this mess fixed could have been something that felt really good and turned him on. Just an idea. But.
Well, what if, during the play, whenever they're supposed to come into physical contact early on, they pretend to shake hands, they pretend to come in contact. In the end, he actually allows her to tie him up. I mean, at that point, I said, this guy will never produce this play. He's never going to write another one. And he's going to get a new career. Because basically, I think that was devastating for him. I mean, some people might have thought him saying, Hail Aphrodite was sort of like a liberation or an insight, but I thought he was finished.
I do see, and I think we're playing with this idea of like his masculinity being drawn into question. And when we're thinking societal expectations of masculinity, what do we traditionally expect of our men? We expect them to be successful. We expect them, to be Superman, be able to fix the car, fix the toilet, climb up something and fix something, and then also be these sexual beings. And he's not really fulfilling any role until that idea of sexuality comes into play. And so I think that maybe then for me becomes the moment where he is a man. Like, here's my moment of being man, is in this moment of sexualness. I don't know. So I think that if you're playing with the idea of societal expectations of masculinity, that's how I would read that.
I was wondering about the first phone call. Was he talking to Stacy the first time, his fiance? Because the way he was talking about all the women that had come in to interview and so forth, I assumed he was talking to a buddy rather than his wife, the way he was going on and on about, oh, these women, they're young, they don't know anything, and they're stupid, and I don't know. And that just seems like a non-masculine way to talk to your fiance, but that was my take.
I was just thinking that maybe he was appeasing her because she was already a little uncomfortable with this play, and he's interviewing all these perhaps young, sexy women, and she felt threatened. I don't know. It was just a thought I had.
Yeah, I actually read that opening conversation that way too, right? I mean, but a conversation also between partners who do, at least on paper, have an egalitarian relationship, right? Where she has a real job that they can talk about, and he has a real job that they can talk about. But also, yeah, early on in the play, he admits to Vonda that the partner doesn't like the play, and it doesn't really like his relationship with the play, which is fair because it seems a little weird.
I view Thomas as a man who secretly probably always wanted to be dominated. But in the masculine world, to be a man and to be successful, especially having a successful partner, it was very difficult for him to settle into something. I don't think that he per se wanted to become feminine or become a woman, but I think he wanted to embody his masculinity through submission. Because in lots of ways...
No, you can't.
Yes, you can. I think you can. I think you absolutely can. I think in some ways it's the ultimate power to be a submissive. And so I think through the course of all the dynamics between the two of them, when Vonda was, critiquing his personal life around the play, it's like he had visibility for the first time of who he really was, and he started to really kind of settle into the acceptance and that it would be okay to be a submissive. And he really settled into that really well as the character, which would be probably really wonderful for him if he's never been able to experience that before.
He did get to the final place of him being who he wanted to be by getting into the role of Vonda in the play, right? So he did have to kind of experiment with maybe acting with more femininity at first to kind of what you were saying, to get into that feeling okay with playing a more submissive role, even though he played it all along, but he didn't kind of come out as his own until the very end, and it was after he took that gender transition in the play. And not to say that you have to be feminine to be submissive, but perhaps that's one of the ways that he was playing with it in his own life.
Just the energy to portray that. Was it unique in terms of other roles that you've performed in because of the human sexuality aspect of how then?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that every role is a little different. There is sort of the fun, like, ooh, they're switching back and forth between characters, and that's kind of fun. But then on the other hand, that is the vehicle through which a lot of things are revealed about what the dynamic is between them, and I don't really know how to answer the question.
I mean, as far as, not sure I understand how to answer
2 hours
that.
without a break.
Well, that's
without an intermission.
super difficult. I mean, it's because and the play itself, if you're reading it carefully, it just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. There's no going back. You know what I mean? So to achieve that and to maintain that and let it end up here. Yeah, that was a challenge and a half.
Julie, what did you see about that situation there with 21st century Vonda and the way that she uses sex and sort of passes off sex as something kind of primitive?
Well, I think it's really interesting, especially when we think why. Like, why does that happen? Why is that allowed to happen? Going to maybe the idea of advertisements and how we've seen women's sexuality being used as power, or if you want to sell a hamburger, right? Carl's Jr. is famous for this. You put a really beautiful woman who probably is not eating this hamburger. Things are dripping down, and she's gorgeous, right? We have the Alabama ex-girlfriend now doing Carl's Jr. commercials. She's gorgeous, but she's eating this beautiful thing. And so what I think women are, or kind of like more, I guess my generation-y are kind of learning is you can use this. You can kind of get what you want. You can bat your eyes, and this can be something that helps you. And I don't necessarily know that I would see it as a negative thing, or just kind of knowing what you have and what you can work with. I think that that's a really fine line that I'm crossing. But I feel, I don't know, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've been thinking about the double standard that comes up with that women are learning to use their sexuality to get what they want, but at the same time, they're at risk for being reduced to only their sexuality. How in the beginning, the character was talking about all of these girls dressed like, I don't know the word that he used, but whores, essentially. And those girls, maybe in their minds, were dressing in a sexual way to try and promote or to try and obtain something that they wanted. And that's, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's a difference, though, between what I want to do, right? So this choice of who I want to be and what I want to dress like, and then what society kind of wants or expects or sees from what I'm performing. So I study outside of this world prostitution, and a lot of the discourse around more current prostitution is like, this is something, if it's seen as a choice, right? This is something that I love to do. I use my body, I have this beautiful thing and I get to use it and I make money, and it's seen as very empowering. So I think we see a competition of discourse happening. So what people who may not take that point of view see as, that's absolutely reverting yourself back, and that's not a progressive feminist look at all, and really this advantageous move that some women are taking. So I would say competing of discourses, and that's a struggle, right? So you'd almost have to walk in and, and I think Vonda did a very good job of walking in with, that's how she's using this as a tool and as a power move. And we see that through the way that she's holding herself, through the words that she's using, and so,
Yeah, although the way that Vonda ends up dominating him is not through sex, but instead through knowing both the play, which is to say her job, right? Being a professional, knowing the play, going into an audition prepared, and then, in an interesting way, learning a lot about him, either because she learned it ahead of time, or because she's able to learn things very quickly as she's interacting with people, to then give him what he wants so that she can get her play. So it's interesting because the sexuality, the sort of using women's sexuality or using the aesthetic of a woman's body, I mean, yes, she's in and out of the little outfits and whatever, and you see a lot of her body, but it's not actually what she ends up using.
It was the magic trick, right? That's what we're focused on. And
right.
She's using her intellect to kind of to dominate. Yeah.
So I thought throughout the play, they kind of systematically brought down that notion that, a woman can also, have that power. Because men are also slaves to their own desires. So a woman can actually use that as well to her advantage. And I kind of saw this in the beginning. Wanda came into the play, even though she's very competent. She kind of played the sexual angle rather than, the competence angle initially.
Well, and I think it puts women into an interesting either or category. Either you're sexual or you're intelligent. Either you're, so you can't be both and it's very hard to be both and. It's very hard to perform and articulate both and because we're so used to thinking either or.
But Vonda is both. Vonda is
right.
Sexually attractive and intellectual.
Right.
She seems to sort of use sex as a way in the door,
right.
And then to use it at selective times during her objective of wanting to get the part or dominating Thomas. Right. But we know pretty quickly too that she's smarter than him.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think she really had to play up either right at the beginning to get in. She couldn't play both roles. She had to really, she chose that very sexual side, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to take off my clothes, and so that kind of got her in the door. And then he's like, wait a second, it becomes intriguing because that's not what I thought was going to come out of that mouth.
Yeah. At the same time, I was curious what Thomas would have done had she presented herself as very intelligent and capable and sexual at the same time.
He seems to express a desire in the play through his conversation at the
Yeah.
beginning about what he wants a real woman, a woman who can embody all these things that 19th century Yvonne. I mean, I don't know if he uses the word real, right? But he's looking for somebody. He has that comment about, women in the 1870s who were 24 had already had 3 kids, and they'd had these experiences, and all I'm getting in this room are 24-year-old women who haven't had the experiences I'm looking for, basically.
So I talked earlier that definitely Thomas is taken over by his passion. Is Vonda? Is she taken over by her passion as well? Or is it all manipulative? See, I would beg to differ, but...
Well, I was talking the question is at the end of the play, I'm not sure what Vonda's objective is. I'm not sure if Vonda's objective is to dominate Thomas, hurt Thomas, or get the role. I feel, and David Ives doesn't tell us this, but I feel about halfway through the play that Vonda does get the role. I mean, I see in Thomas's eyes that he can't imagine anyone else playing this part, and he can't imagine himself not being on stage with this person.
Well, she has that great line about actors' equity, and this is the longest I've had to go without actually getting a contract, right? And so then that makes it all about him and his fantasy in his head, right? Because he can't let her go. I mean, at a certain point, everybody in the audience is like, well, she has the part. And yet that part is never actually forthcoming because it's working for him psychologically. Like, he's trying to figure out his relationship to the play, and keeping her there is helping him do that.
One point at the end, when he was on his knees and the character of Wanda had both arms in the air on a table, and he was saying, "Hail Aphrodite." The whole play was about a play within a play. But for me, at that very moment, at the very end, it stopped being a play within a play, and it became about Thomas, the character of Thomas, and it just kind of focused right in on reality. And it was 21st century, and it was modern, and he is who he was, or he is who he is. And I think he got in touch with who he was through the whole process.
Well, yes, and that feeds back into what someone else was saying about the Greek mythology, that's what happens when the gods or goddesses come in and make us realize who we are as people. So, yes, I agree with 21st century, but again, if you look at plays throughout history, I mean, human nature is very, very much the same. It's really not any different now than it was when the Greeks were writing their plays. I mean, yes, some of the mores are different, but we're the same.
We haven't gotten any better.
Well, it's arguable.
Yeah, for all of you up there, wonderfulness. I have a question, just if you comment to the idea of a lot of these feminist these feminist tones of the play being authored by a man.
I mean, she came in feeling very much like this feminist voice that was going to correct the weirdness of this late 19th century play that this guy is obsessed with. And so I certainly, I think Ives did a wonderful job. And she's a very interesting, fun, likable character, which sadly for you is not true of yours character. Well, at least for me. I mean, perhaps other people found him sympathetic. But And so, I mean, she's great. And if you're sitting in college, or certainly as I did, reading all the great texts of Western literature, you need a feminist voice in you're just like, where is the feminist voice, right, in the text? Why are we giving up Athens to, whatever? And so that, I think, was really fun, right, to bring that in. Authentically, I mean, she seems really smart, so maybe that's not as authentic. I mean, can any of us really be that smart all the time?
Was this idea that, sorry, this is you, that masculinity is kind of seen almost as one note, right? Like, we're complicating femininity, we're playing with feminism, and masculinity is just like, here you have it. Men are simple creatures. They want sex. And they want, they kind of play with power, right? But through sex, if you want power and sex, we'll let you have that for a moment. And to me, I think that's interesting. In my own work, I feel like I try to complicate that. Like, that's been something I've been playing with. So something that I really noticed is like, where's the dimension in the masculinity? Perhaps a little bit in the emotion, but not too much. So.
Well, also the dimension, though, is in his discomfort with it, right? That it's not fitting him well. That the kind of masculine options that he feels he has.
Yeah.
Would you know?
Yeah. Kind of, I guess. It just, I guess it didn't feel as, and I mean, that probably wasn't the point, right? The point is about her, but just.
He's in the play.
Yeah.
It can be, it is about him.
But then I feel like even as an audience, we've been saying he wasn't being masculine.
Yeah.
Which then validates this one layer of masculinity. I mean, yeah, maybe he was trying to put layers in and change it, but as an audience, you know, we talked about he wasn't being masculine.
Yeah.
Because he didn't fit that layer.
Or maybe he was
One
like
dimension
in
that we see.
the purest sense, if we take the idea of masculinity being this kind of like inexpressive male, which came up in the 1980s, that could have been, right? So there's your no.
So I didn't actually know that it was written by a man, but when I am reading something or experiencing some sort of media about, say, feminism, and it's by a man, it's something that I at least have to check in on, and I'm really happy to hear, you know, a lot of women's opinions about that here. But I don't think that discredits the author in any way just because he's a man. It's just something, as another man, I have to check because I could be getting hit by all sorts of blindsided biases and assumptions that I wasn't aware of. So that's just my answer, I guess.
But if it was written by a woman, I think that the play on sexuality and sexual dominance would have been like an interesting conversation then to have.
I thought, I've been a big fan of David Ives for a long time. I thought he has what it takes to bring that to the page. I think it probably helped that you had Tracy as a director. I think having, you know, because you've got a script, but a script doesn't make a production. A production is made by the vision of a director and the actors on the stage. So again, hats off to you guys for an amazing production and Tracy's direction. I really think that the play couldn't have been as successful and communicate all of the wonderful things that were on the page if it wasn't for the great job that you guys did. So I think that's probably a good place to end.